When is it time to keep your head down? And when is it time to stick your neck out, to speak up, to stand up, especially when somebody else is in danger or their life is being threatened? How do you know what it's time for? That's the critical question in the second half of the book of Esther, continuing the story we were introduced to last week, and it's where we're going to pick up this time in our session in Faithful Rebels. So last week, we were introduced to the setting of the book of Esther, and we first met King Xerxes, this Persian king who's ruling an empire that includes the former people of Judah, now starting to be called Jews as an ethnic national group, who are subjects of the Persian Empire. We heard the story of how a defiant queen, Vashti, refused to comply with an arbitrary and kind of cruel, rude, objectifying demand of the king, and she gets deposed, and a new queen is coronated. They have sort of a beauty pageant, and Esther finds herself the new queen to King Xerxes. But she's Jewish, and she's kept that identity secret because it's not really a safe time. That's an ethnic minority group that's viewed with suspicion in the Persian Empire at this time. Well, an enemy figure arises in the story, a guy named Haman, who is almost as close to like a comic book villain as you can get in the Bible. I know sometimes figures are morally ambiguous in the Bible, and good people also do some rotten stuff, and rotten people sometimes do good things. Haman is almost completely like cardboard cutout black hat wearing villain. He's got a personal grudge against one of the Jewish people, a guy named Mordecai, and he wants to take it out on all Jewish people. So he's conspiring and wants to get the king to approve eliminating this entire group of people, the people of God, the Jewish people. And so he gets the king to agree. He says, there's a whole segment of our population, there's a minority group in your empire, in your jurisdiction, and they have different customs and different cultures and different language, and they dress funny, and they don't acknowledge our gods, and we should get rid of them because they're different. Even though they have been living peacefully within the empire, basically at peace with everybody for, since several empires had come and gone, but Haman comes along and decides they're a threat, wants to get rid of them all, and gets the king to agree. Yes, they're dangerous. We should get rid of them all. Well, now a public edict has gone out that at such and such a date, all the Jewish people in the territory of the Persian Empire to be rounded up and killed. So here's the question for Esther, who finds herself in a place of relative security, right? She's the queen, and as long as she keeps her identity on the down low, she could theoretically let all the rest of her people die and keep her identity secret and continue to live. But her relative, Mordecai, approaches her through a messenger and says, you need to speak up. You need to be the one to speak up and save your people. And she says, well, but it's dangerous. If I go in front of the king without having been officially summoned, that could be a death sentence for me. After all, you remember what happened in the beginning of this story with Queen Vashti. She doesn't show up when the king summons, and she gets deposed. This could be really bad for me. If I stick my neck out, this could hurt me. And Mordecai wrestles with the question with her. He sends back to her this really, really important response. He says, if you don't act right now, salvation for God's people will come from some other quarter, but who knows? But that you have been raised up for just such a time and place as this. And hearing that, Esther decides, maybe I have been raised up to this position, this moment, this situation for just this situation. We talked last week about how the book of Esther sometimes is described as being a book or story of the hidden God, because the word God, the name for Israel's God, Yahweh, doesn't show up anywhere in the book, at least not in the actual text, but sort of behind the scenes, right? When Mordecai says, who knows but that you have been raised up for such a time as this? Well, who's doing the raising, right? It's sort of this assumed, well, maybe God's put you in this position, right? And what I love about this story, what is also really important and difficult and wrestling for each of us, is that Mordecai doesn't say, I had a vision and God spoke to me. Esther doesn't get a dream or a vision where God speaks. There's no burning bushes. There's no lightning. There's no clear, audible, miraculous sign. It's people thinking out faithfully, what does our faith in God lead us to believe we are called to do and to say in this moment? That's what it takes for Esther. She decides in that conversation with her relative Mordecai, you're right, I've been put in this situation. I can speak up, and I will take the risk and try and save my people. She asks for prayer and time for fasting for her to focus and sort of get her head straight, but she does it, and in this beautiful, almost Shakespearean reversal, it turns out the wicked plot that Haman has cooked up gets foiled, and his arch enemy Mordecai, who he hated so much, gets lifted up and recognized for previous acts of heroism, and in the end, in a way that, again, like is almost like out of a Shakespeare play, Haman ends up being hung on the gallows that he had constructed to hang Mordecai on. This sort of sense of divine reversal of the very tools that the villain had planned to use for evil end up getting used on him. He gets, as they say, hoisted by his own petard. The end of the story is as close to a happy ending as you get in a biblical book, where the people of God are delivered. They're set free from the threat that they'll be wiped out, and they can celebrate that they have been delivered on this day. And the threat that was there trying to wipe them out, Haman, is out of the picture by the end of the story. But what lingers in this story is not just the joy of another time of being delivered, alongside all those other stories that the ancient people of God told, from being delivered from slavery, from Pharaoh, and being brought through the sea, and homecoming from exile. Besides all of those, there's this awareness that sometimes you don't get a voice from heaven. Sometimes you don't get a dream. Sometimes you don't get something miraculous telling you it's your time to speak up. It's your time not to keep your head down or look away, but it's your time to raise your voice and say, no, things are not okay. No, the way things are going is not acceptable. No, people who are in harm's way, who are being threatened, it's not okay to turn my head and hope that I'm fine. A lot of people know these days that famous poem saying by Martin Niemöller, who lived during the 1930s in Germany, that begin, first they came for the communists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist, and then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist, and then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew, and then they came for me, and by then there was no one else left to speak up. Esther's story is one of those moments that, thousands of years before Niemöller writes that in a poem in the midst of the Nazi regime, Esther's story says, sometimes you have to speak up, even if you think, well, if I keep my head down, I could, keep myself safe. Sometimes you have to be the one who speaks up for other people whose lives or well-being are threatened, both for their well-being and because that begins to lead the groundwork to others being disappeared or hurt or taken advantage of as well. The challenge with Esther's story is not just say, oh, what an interesting episode in history a long time ago that I don't have to think about anymore, but that we are constantly being asked over and over again the same question Mordecai puts to Esther. Who knows, but that you and I have been put in this moment, in this circumstance, for just such a time and place as this. And how we use the platforms we have, the opportunities we have to speak, to advocate, to be there for people who need someone to speak for them, that's the challenge we face every day. So join us for that conversation in our Thursday Bible study, Faithful Rebels, 1 o'clock here at Community of Christ, or if you can't join us in person, catch up with these video summaries as well. See you along the way.